Interrogations. Daylight was breaking when they stepped back on the Mega, and Horan lost no time in drawing the anchor and starting the engine. It was best to get away quickly, he said. There was bound to be trouble once the news of the killing reached the forest department. In the past, similar incidents had led to riots, shootings, and large-scale arrests. As the Botboti was making its turn, Kanai headed towards his cabin to change, while Pia went as if by habit to her usual place at the head of the upper deck. Kanai assumed she would be back on effort in a matter of minutes, but when he came out again, she was sitting slumped on the deck, leaning listlessly against a rail, and he knew from her posture that she had been crying. He went to sit beside her. "Look, Pia," he said, "don't torment yourself with this. There's nothing we could have done. We could have tried. It would have made no difference." "I guess." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Anyway, Kanai," she said, "I feel I owe you an apology." "For what you said back there?" Kanai smiled. "That's all right. You had every right to be upset." She shook her head. "No, it's not just that." "Then?" "Do you remember what you were telling me yesterday?" She said. "Fact is, you were right and I was wrong." "I'm not sure what you're talking about." "You know," said Pia, "what you said about there being nothing in common between you and Fakir?" "Yes," said Pia. "You were right. I was just being stupid. I guess it took something like that for me to get it straight." Kanai choked back the first triumphant comment that came to his mind, and said instead in as neutral a voice as he could muster, "And how did this revelation come to be granted to you?" "By what just happened," said Pia. I couldn't believe Fakir's response. "But what did you expect, Pia?" Kanai said. "Did you think he was some kind of grassroots ecologist? He's not. He's a fisherman. He kills animals for a living." "I understand that," said Pia. "I'm not blaming him. I know this is what he grew up with. It's just, I thought somehow he'd be different." Kanai placed a sympathetic hand on her knee. "Let's not dwell on this," he said. "After all, you have a lot of work to do." She raised her head and forced a smile. The Mega had been underway for about an hour when a gray motorboat roared past it. Pia was in the bow with her binoculars and Kanai was sitting in the shade. They moved to the gunwale to watch as the boat sped downriver, and they saw it was filled with khaki-uniformed forest guards. It seemed to be heading in the direction of the village they had left. Horan came to join them and said something that made Kanai laugh. "According to Horan," Kanai explained to Pia, "if you're caught between a pirate and a forester, you should always give yourself up to the pirate. You'll be safer." Pia nodded wryly, recalling her own experience with the forest guard. "What do you think they're going to do to that village?" she said. Kanai shrugged. "There'll be arrests, fines, beatings, who knows what else." Another hour went by, and then, while crossing a Mahona, they spotted a small flotilla of gray motorboats. These were heading in the same direction as the motorboat they had passed earlier. "Wow," said Pia. "Looks like they mean business." "I'm sure they do." Suddenly, one of the motorboats parted company with the others and swung around. As it picked up speed, it became clear that it had set its course to intercept the Mega. On catching sight of it, Horan thrust his head out of the wheelhouse and spoke urgently to Kanai. "Pia, you have to go to your cabin," said Kanai. "Horan says there'll be trouble if they find you on the boat. It's something to do with your being a foreigner and not having the right kind of permit." "Okay." Pia carried her backpack to her cabin and pulled the door shut. She lay down on her bunk and listened to the sound of the motorboat's engine as it grew gradually louder. When it was cut off, she knew the boat had pulled up alongside. She heard people conversing in Bengali, politely at first and then with increasing acrimony. Kanai's voice was counterpointed against a number of others. A good hour passed. Arguments went back and forth and voices rose and fell. Pia was glad she had a bottle of water with her, for the cabin grew steadily hotter as the day advanced. At length the voices died down and the motorboat pulled away. A knock sounded on Pia's door just as the Mega's engine was coming alive again. She was relieved to find Kanai standing outside. "What was all that about?" she said. Kanai made a face. Apparently they'd heard a foreigner was at the village yesterday when the tiger was killed. They're very exercised about it. Why? They said it's a security risk for a foreigner to be wandering about so close to the border, without a guard, but my feeling is that they just don't want the news to get out. About the killing? Yes, Kanai nodded. It makes them look bad. Anyway, it seems they know you're at large in these parts and now they're on the lookout. They kept asking if we'd seen you. What did you say? Kanai smiled. Horan and I adopted a policy of unyielding denial. It seemed to be working until they spotted Fokir. One of the guards recognized him and said you were last seen on his boat. Oh my God, said Pia. Was it a kind of a weasel-looking guy? Yes, said Kanai. That's the one. I don't know what he told the others, but they were all set to drag Fokir off to jail. Fortunately, I was able to persuade them to change their minds. And how did you do that? Kanai's voice became very dry. Shall we say I mentioned the names of a few friends and parted with a few notes? She guessed his ironic tone was intended to downplay the seriousness of the situation, and she was suddenly grateful for his calm, urbane presence. What would have happened if he hadn't been there? She knew that in all likelihood she would have ended up on one of those official motorboats. She put a hand on Kanai's arm. Thank you. I appreciate it. I really do. And I'm sure Fokir does too. Kanai acknowledged this by dipping his head ironically. Always glad to oblige. In a graver tone of voice, he added, However, I do have to say, Pia, you really should think seriously of turning back. If they find you, there could be trouble. You could end up in jail and there's not much I or anyone else could do. The proximity of the border changes everything. Pia looked into the distance as she considered this. She thought of Blythe and Roxburgh and the naturalists who had crossed these waters 100 years before and found them teeming with cetaceans. She thought of all the years in between when, for one reason or another, no one had paid any heed to these creatures, and so no one had known of their decimation. It had fallen to her to be the first to carry back a report of the current situation, and she knew she could not turn back from the responsibility. I can't return right now, can I? She said. It's hard to explain to you how important my work is. If I leave, who knows how long it'll be before another cetologist can come here. I've got to stay as long as I possibly can. Kanai frowned. And what if they take you off to jail? Pia shrugged. How long could they keep me anyway? And when they let me out, the material will still be in my head. At midday, with the sun blazing overhead, Pia took a break and came to sit beside Kanai in the shade of the awning. There was a troubled look in her eyes that prompted Kanai to say, Are you still thinking about the forest guards? This seemed to startle her. Oh no, not that. Then, she tipped her head back to drink from her water bottle. The village, she said, wiping her mouth. Last night. I still can't get it out of my head. I keep seeing it again and again. The people, the flames. It was like something from some other time, before recorded history. I feel like I'll never be able to get my head around. Kanai prompted her as she faltered. The horror? The horror, yes. I wonder if I'll ever be able to forget it. Probably not. But for Fakir and Horan and the others, it was just a part of everyday life, wasn't it? I imagine they've learned to take it in their stride, Pia. They've had to. That's what haunts me, said Pia, in a way that makes them a part of the horror too, doesn't it? Kanai snapped shut the notebook. To be fair to Fakir and Horan, I don't think it's quite that simple, Pia. I mean, aren't we a part of the horror as well? You and me and people like us? Pia ran a hand through her hair. I don't see how. That tiger had killed 2 people, Pia, Kanai said, and that was just in one village. It happens every week that people are killed by tigers. How about the horror of that? If there were killings on that scale anywhere else on Earth, it would be called a genocide, and yet here it goes almost unremarked. These killings are never reported, never written about in the papers. And the reason is just that these people are too poor to matter. We all know it, but we choose not to see it. Isn't that a horror too? That we can feel the suffering of an animal, but not of human beings? But Kanai, Pia retorted. Everywhere in the world dozens of people are killed every day. On roads, in cars, in traffic. Why is this any worse? Because we are complicit in this, Pia. That's why. Pia disassociated herself with a shake of the head. I don't see how I'm complicit. Because it was people like you, said Kanai, who made a push to protect the wildlife here, without regard for the human costs. And I'm complicit because people like me, Indians of my class that is, have chosen to hide these costs basically in order to curry favor with their Western patrons. It's not hard to ignore the people who are dying. After all, they're the poorest of the poor. But just ask yourself whether this would be allowed to happen anywhere else. There are more tigers living in America in captivity than there are in all of India. What do you think would happen if they started killing human beings? But Kanai, said Pia, there's a big difference between preserving a species in captivity and keeping it in its habitat. And what is that difference exactly? The difference, Kanai, Pia said slowly and emphatically, is that it was what was intended, not by you or me, but by nature, by the earth, by the planet that keeps us all alive. Just suppose we cross that imaginary line that prevents us from deciding that no other species matters except ourselves. What will be left then? Aren't we alone enough in the universe? And do you think it'll stop at that? Once we decide we can kill off other species, it'll be people next, just the kind of people you're thinking of, people who are poor and unnoticed. That's all very easy for you to say, Pia, but it's not you who's paying the price in lost lives. Pia challenged him. Do you think I wouldn't pay the price if I thought it necessary? You mean you'd be willing to die? Kanai scoffed. Come on, Pia. I'm telling you the truth, Kanai, Pia said quietly. If I thought giving up my life might make the river safe again for the Irrawaddy dolphin, the answer is yes, I would. But the trouble is that my life, your life, 1,000 lives would make no difference. It's easy to say these things. Easy? There was a parched weariness in Pia's voice now. Tell me, do you see anything easy about what I do? Look at me. I have no home, no money, and no prospects. My friends are thousands of kilometers away, and I get to see them maybe once a year, if I'm lucky. And that's the least of it. On top of that is the knowledge that what I'm doing is more or less futile. She looked up and he saw that there were tears in her eyes. There's nothing easy about this, Kanai, she said. You have to take that back. He swallowed the quick retort that had come to his lips. Instead, he reached for her hand and placed it between his own. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have said that. I take it back. She snatched her hand away and rose to her feet. I'd better get back to work. As she turned to her place, he called out, "You're a brave woman. Do you know that?" She shrugged this off in embarrassment. "I'm just doing my job."